코로나19 대유행 상황에서도 ESG 경영을 선언하는 기업이 늘고 있습니다. 기업의 지속가능한 발전을 위해서는 환경과 사회, 지배구조를 뜻하는 ESG를 주목해야 한다는 목소리가 커지고 있는데요. 새로운 화두로 떠오른 ESG 경영을 잘 실천하기 위해서는 어떻게 해야 할까요? T3 세계자연기금 아시아금융 총괄과 함께 기업의 성공 궤도로 가는 ESG 경영에 대해 이야기 나눠봅니다.
올해 기업 경영에 가장 중요한 이슈로 떠오른 것이 있습니다. 바로 ESG 경영인데요. 세계적인 금융투자기관들이 ESG를 투자의 핵심 잣대로 삼겠다고 밝히면서 ESG는 기업의 새로운 성장 조건으로 떠올랐습니다.
과연 여기에서 ESG란 무엇이고 우리나라의 ESG 경영 수준은 어느 정도일지 알아보는 시간 갖도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 세계자연기금 아시아지속가능금융 총괄 모시고서 이야기 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 어서 오세요.
안녕하십니까?
안녕하세요.
네, 세계자연기금 솔직히 말씀드리자면 처음 들어봤습니다. 그래서 먼저 어떤 곳인지, 무엇을 하는 곳인지 소개를 좀 부탁드릴 수 있을까요?
Yes, and thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. WWF is one of the world's largest and most experienced conservation organizations, and we're active in over 100 countries. Our mission is to stop the degradation of Earth's natural environment and to build a future in which people and nature can live in harmony together. To do this, we collaborate with communities, businesses, governments, and financial institutions to drive transformative change, drawing upon the science-based expertise that WWF has across multiple environmental issues. In Korea, we've been active since 2014, and we focus on engaging with companies over climate action and sustainable seafood supply chains for ocean conservation. Since 2018, we've been engaging the Korean financial sector to support progress on sustainable finance in collaboration with the WWF Asia Sustainable Finance team that's based in Singapore.
네, 세계자연기금에서 아시아은행을 대상으로 이렇게 서스바라고 읽으면 되는 거 맞죠? 은행 부문 지속가능금융 평가 보고서를 발표를 하고 있는데요. 은행이 어떤 점들을 평가하는 건지 설명 좀 부탁드릴까요?
Yes, so most people actually don't realize that WWF has a focus on sustainable finance. But actually, we are a leader in this space. For instance, in Europe, we're represented on the European Platform for Sustainable Finance and directly contributed to the EU taxonomy on sustainability. In Asia, we are a bit newer, but we're already engaging with financial institutions, central banks, and regulators across ASEAN, Japan, China, and South Korea to support progress on sustainable finance. We help the financial sector to understand and assess the risks that climate change and other environmental issues pose to financial portfolios, and we work with them to support them to finance sustainable development. For that reason, SASBA focuses on how commercial banks are integrating ESG across their overall strategy and financing activities.
이 서스바에는 ESG가 굉장히 중요한 포인트인 것 같습니다. 여기에서 ESG가 무엇이고 또 어느 중요한 점을 갖는지 설명 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
So ESG refers to environmental, social, and governance issues that are relevant to businesses and financial institutions. You can think of ESG issues in terms of risks and opportunities, which refers to how they can impact a business's or financial institution's ability to create value in the future. ESG issues can also be thought of in terms of impacts, which refers to how businesses and financial institutions can contribute to these issues as a result of their business activities or the activities that they finance. And examples of ESG issues include climate change, deforestation, water scarcity, pollution, labor rights, and human rights. And ESG issues can often be financially material. In other words, they can impact businesses' financial performance by impacting the income statement or the balance sheet. As such, management of ESG issues should be a key part of any business's overall strategy. And following from that, banks and other financial institutions should assess the ESG performance of companies that they finance. If they do not, it's quite likely that they will miss part of the overall picture when they're assessing these companies' creditworthiness, profitability, or growth potential.
예, 그렇다면 이 ESG의 수준을 무조건 뭐 잘하고 있다, 못하고 있다 이렇게 하기도 애매할 것이고요. 어떻게 평가를 하게 되는지 그게 좀 궁금해지는데 평가 항목들이 따로 있을까요?
So SASBA is based on the comprehensive assessment framework that comprises 6 pillars of ESG integration: purpose, policies, processes, people, products, and portfolio. These 6 pillars and the underlying indicators that they represent lay out a comprehensive roadmap that identifies key steps for banks to take in order to integrate ESG across their entire organization. Together, the 6 Ps cover things like the bank's high-level statements and commitments on sustainability, their stance on key ESG risks and the expectations that they have for clients to manage them, how they integrate ESG into approval and monitoring processes for clients and transactions, whether they have the appropriate governance frameworks, teams, training and incentives in place for their people, whether they actively drive sustainable development by offering specific financial products or setting green financing targets, and lastly, whether they take a portfolio-level approach to managing ESG risks and opportunities.
그럼 여기서 이제 궁금해지는 게 있어요. 바로 우리나라 은행들은 서스바에서 어떤 평가를 받았는지에 대해서 궁금해지고요. 한국 은행들의 ESG 경영 인식 수준은 어느 정도로 평가가 됐는지 말씀해 주실 수 있을까요?
So Korean banks are doing well in terms of disclosing how they've integrated sustainability into their overall strategy and long-term visions at a similar level to ASEAN banks. And notably, 4 out of the 5 Korean banks are actually signatories to the UNEP FI's Principles for Responsible Banking. All 5 also contribute to sustainable development by offering green financial products for their clients, which will be key to delivering on the Korean government's Green New Deal. However, there remain significant opportunities for Korean banks to improve their disclosures on the policies and processes that they are using to manage ESG risks in their financing activities. Korean banks also have opportunities to improve in terms of their people. For instance, by integrating ESG into KPIs and performance evaluation criteria, by establishing dedicated ESG teams, and by training senior management and staff on ESG issues. Without these steps, it's unclear how well Korean banks are managing ESG risks in their financing activities, which means that their portfolios could be exposed to risks resulting from climate change, water scarcity, or violations of human and labor rights.
예, 그러면 앞으로 ESG 경영이 기업의 생존을 좌우할 거다 이런 얘기까지 나오고 있는 상황인데 실제로 세계적인 자산운용사들이 기업에다가 ESG 경영을 요구하는 목소리도 꽤 나오고 있다고요. 그거 좀 얘기 좀 해주시죠.
Indeed, investors are increasingly focused on the ESG performance of their portfolio companies, and they're exercising their influence as shareholders by engaging with company management, voting against boards, and also filing shareholder resolutions. Just last year, we also saw 30 asset managers controlling $9 trillion in assets under management also pledged to support the goal of net zero emissions by 2050 via the Net Zero Asset Manager Initiative. It's with actions like these that we can expect to see investor action on climate change and other ESG issues continue to accelerate.
그리고 기업의 ESG 경영을 위해서는 은행의 역할이 중요하다고 말씀하셨습니다. 어떤 이유에서인가요?
So banks can actually play a key role in financing sustainable development because they are key financiers of not only large companies but also small and medium enterprises. As such, they can actually use the access to and cost of capital to incentivize their clients to take ambitious steps to transform their business models and therefore also our region's energy, food, transportation and infrastructure systems. This of course depends on the existence of strong lending policies that require clients to align with international ESG best practices, as well as the ability of banks to engage with these clients and support them to achieving these best practices. Banks can also actively finance activities which are aligned with fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals, such as climate adaptation and mitigation related projects, including renewable energy, rural electrification, projects in sustainable agriculture, transportation and infrastructure, and also water conservation.
예, 지금 은행이 기후변화에까지 신경을 써야 된다, 관심을 가져야 된다고 하는데 왜 환경 문제까지 은행이 고민을 해야 될까요?
So it's now widely acknowledged that climate change in particular can pose significant risks for businesses, as has already been outlined by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And climate-related risks can take two forms, physical and transition risks. Physical risks refer to the physical impacts of climate change, for instance, damage to companies' physical assets, supply chain disruptions, reduced crop yields, and lost worker productivity. Transition risks are those resulting from changing markets, technologies, policies, and regulations that result from global efforts to address climate change. For example, the Korean government's recent pledge to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And the accelerating shift away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy is one such example. And physical and transition risks can impact businesses' income statements and the value of the assets on their balance sheets, and so they will also affect the overall creditworthiness of banks' clients. But they can also create opportunities, as we see with renewable energy and other clean technology. And for this reason, banks cannot afford to ignore climate change.
기후 변화와 같은 경우에는 사실 전 세계적인 이슈지만은 기업의 입장에서는 수익성을 극대화해야 되잖아요. 그래서 ESG 경영에 집중을 하다가 수익성을 놓칠 수 있다는 반론이 제기되고 있습니다. 이에 대한 생각은 어떠신가요?
So our perspective is that actually profitability and sustainability do not have to come at a trade-off, and that economic, social, and environmental well-being are deeply interlinked. So there are two perspectives on this. And the first one is risks and opportunities, which I've already explained through the example of climate change. The other perspective pertains to how our economic activities are dependent on healthy and functioning natural capital. And natural capital refers to the world's stock of natural assets, such as our geology, soil, water, air, plants, animals, and other living things. Natural capital provides invaluable ecosystem services like food, climate regulation, and natural protection against floods. So when businesses damage the environment, they are actually eroding their own long-term viability. And the relationship between sustainability and corporate financial performance is actually underscored by academic research. University of Hamburg researchers have reviewed over 2,000 studies on this topic, and they found that 90% of them actually find non-negative correlations between ESG and corporate financial performance. In fact, they find that the majority of studies report a positive correlation. Similarly, a review by Arabesque Partners and researchers at the University of Oxford of over 200 studies found that 90% of these studies report positive correlations between business sustainability and measures like share price performance and operational performance. The study also found that 90% of the studies they reviewed report that more sustainable businesses benefit from a lower cost of capital. Such studies dispel the notion that ESG means higher costs or lost business opportunities. Perhaps some upfront investment is going to be required, for instance in systems or personnel, but the paybacks are clearly there.
네, 이제 마지막으로 우리 한국 은행들이 보다 바람직한 ESG 경영을 위해서는 어떤 점을 또 보완하고 어떤 점을 또 개선해야 될지 조언 한마디 해주시죠.
So an enabling environment will be critical in order to ensure continued progress on sustainable finance in Korea. And this should really include specific regulations or guidelines for banks and other financial institutions to manage and disclose on environmental and climate-related risks. This will be a key step to take in order to ensure a level playing field for banks both within the country and also across the wider region, and should be supplemented by supervisory measures such as climate-related stress testing for banks and other financial institutions. It will also be key to ensure that all corporates are disclosing sufficient and standardized information about their ESG performance in order to allow banks and other financial institutions to properly assess and price ESG-related risks and opportunities. As such, wider ESG disclosure regulations or guidelines are important to ensure a minimum level of disclosure. Finally, in order to scale up capital flows to sustainable and low-carbon businesses while avoiding greenwashing, a science-based taxonomy that classifies economic activities into different levels of sustainability is required and can be used as the basis for green finance standards and labels. Such a taxonomy could also be used to complement supervisory measures, for instance, by implementing differentiated capital charges for assets on the balance sheet of banks and other financial institutions. It's great to have seen some recent announcements in the Korean financial sector touching upon many of the points that I've just mentioned, and we very much look forward to seeing further action from the finance sector on sustainable finance in the near future.
네, 지금 이야기를 들어보니까 우리나라의 ESG 수준은 아직까지는 걸음마 단계라고 할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 오늘부터라도 더 많은 기업들이 ESG를 철저하게 관리해서 미래 시장에서 지속 성장하기를 기대해 보겠습니다.
네, 자 오늘 말씀 여기까지 듣겠습니다. 고맙습니다.
고맙습니다.
감사합니다.